for the DRCOG. Call the DRCOG work session to order for Wednesday, March 5th. This is Steve Conklin filling in briefly till Chair Whitlow makes it in here. And Melinda has attendance based on who is logged into the call. I do not have the agenda open in front of me, Doug, so I will throw it to the first item on the agenda.
That's great. So the first item's ready to, oh, here we go. We got now is the overview of the Regional Housing Strategy Work Plan, and that would be Sheila Lynch.
It looked like there was a call for public comment there. Was that correct?
I'm so sorry. You're exactly right.
Well, it appeared on screen set that we will open it up for public comment if there is public comment. Melinda, that's and thank you everybody for your patience. We're getting there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see any hands raised at the moment. I don't know if you want to give it a second.
We'll give it just a moment, just in case.
Absolutely.
And then we will move ahead with the meeting. Mr. Rex.
Thank you, sir, very much. So our first item today is an update on the regional housing strategy work that Sheila Lynch and her staff are taking on. So I'll just turn it to Sheila.
Thanks, Doug. Good evening, everyone, or not quite good evening, good afternoon. I am really happy to be here today to tell you a little bit about our housing strategy. And yes, we're launching. Let's all give a round of applause. We are kicking this off. Let me share my screen. Can you see my slide deck? Okay. Yep, awesome. Great. So as many of you know, we started our work on housing or in a more formal way a couple of years ago. We had many intentional conversations with all of you to understand how best to engage this regional conversation around housing. And we started with a regional housing needs assessment. We started that in October of 2023. We officially accepted that in October of 2024. And our intention is to take the next step and convene and develop a regional housing strategy. So today, what we wanted to do is just give you an overview of the work plan for the regional housing strategy, just so you understand kind of what lies ahead for this work in the next 11 months, almost a year. And then also we are going to introduce an opportunity that we're going to build into the regional housing strategy for a few of you, hopefully, to volunteer and fill a role in this process. And then we also, because we love having interactive discussions, we have a Mentimeter exercise where we're going to try to get more input and more guidance from all of you through a few short questions today. So as we've explained in almost every presentation about our housing work, is that our housing work is definitely rooted in our regional plan Metro Vision. In the last update, which was unanimously adopted by DRCOG's board in 2017, diverse housing options to meet the needs of residents of all ages, incomes, and ability was front and center as an objective within our plan. And since then, we have worked on a number of different projects to try to support our local governments in this work. And it's through the needs assessment and now the strategy where we will be more formally articulating components that we will be working on collectively. So one of the things that we always ground ourselves in is that housing markets are regional. And that is something that many of our board members brought to DRCOG when we first started talking about walking into a more formal role in housing, is that because housing markets are regional, local efforts are extremely important. And there are some things that local governments can't take on alone. And they really do need a regional table to have those conversations and come up with solutions to address those challenges around housing. So wanted to just remind you of our overall timeline of our housing work. So we launched, as I said, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment back in October 2023. finished our contract with our consultants in July, but then the board officially accepted the needs assessment in October 2024. And now we're launching our regional housing strategy. We anticipate taking about 1 year to do this. And our hope ultimately, and our intention truly, is that we will be incorporating what we come up with through our housing strategy into our next update of our regional plan, Metro Vision, and also our regional transportation plan. So just a reminder, and for those of you that may be new to the board, our regional housing needs assessment was organized into 3 key parts. The first was a data analysis. We really want to understand the scale and scope of need across our region. And so one of the key deliverables of that was understanding in terms of numbers, what that looked like across our region. We also have a data dashboard that you can go to look at the data analysis from a regional perspective, a sub-regional level, and even down to the local level. And we'll have a link at the end of this presentation to our website where you can connect with that. And the second part of our needs assessment was looking at what are the barriers that are getting in the way of addressing housing need across our region. And what we heard from a stakeholder engagement process of over 200 stakeholders, we will be incorporating as we launch our housing strategy. And then the last piece that we did when we were kind of had our stakeholders together formally through the assessment, we asked them, so as we launch our strategy, what kind of framework or what should we be considering? So we have that to build on as well. So now I'm going to walk through what we anticipate to be part of the work over the next year. And wanted to start with, as I mentioned, the framework that we developed during the housing needs assessment. One of the key pieces that we developed were guiding principles for our strategy. And this came from engagement across many, many different stakeholders, local government staff, developers, people who provide support services to people who may be living in some of the housing that the housing developers have developed. So we really had a broad a cross-section of different professionals who are touching housing in some way, help us with developing these guiding principles. And as you can see, it really captures a lot in that. First, one of the things we heard very strongly was that our strategy needs to be rooted in our vision for equity across the region. And at DRCOG, we always start from a data-informed approach. That's what our assessment helped us do. And that needs to be grounded throughout the entire development of the strategy. We also heard from stakeholders that we need to ensure some flexibility. We saw that too, even in our data analysis across regions, that it looks different in different regions. And so the strategies that we may employ across our region in different subregions may look different. And that our strategy should be comprehensive. We need to keep in mind that addressing housing need is going to span many different approaches, including the development of new housing, the preservation of existing housing, and we really need to be looking comprehensively at what are those regionally scaled strategies that we feel like will work in the Denver region. We heard from stakeholders that it would be very helpful to be identifying what unique roles and authorities that different either organizations or sectors play in the implementation of the strategy, and resource identification of resources. We heard loud and clear that one of the biggest barriers is funding. And so how do we think creatively in our strategy about how to address that? The one that I like to point out is that we need to be thinking short and long term, that our housing challenges are now or facing them now. So we need to have some strategies that try to think short term and try to make improvements now. At the same time, it is important as a region that we're thinking longer term, so we understand what the implications of the strategies we come up with will have in a longer time frame. So we have hired a robust consultant team. We are working with Echo Northwest. If that name sounds familiar, it should. They were our consultant for the regional housing needs assessment. And this time around, they added a few additional consulting partners to work with them. Community Planning Collaborative worked with us during the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Their role will be in convening some of the groups that I'm going to describe in just a minute. Root Policy Research is a woman-owned Colorado-based firm that they added to the group. They are very well versed in housing across our state. They've done many housing needs assessments and action plans, even in the local governments in our region. So very familiar with the Denver region. MIG is a national firm that has a strong Denver presence that will lead us through the engagement portion. And then tool design was brought on to the team because one of the things we're asking the team to do is to really draw that connection with transportation investment and transportation plans to understand how our strategies will work alongside of that. So our work plan, three key phases. These are in a way sequential, but they will overlap. The first phase, we've asked our consultants to start with a bit of a discovery phase. The reason being is we want to start our stakeholder engagement with a foundation of understanding and knowledge of what's already happening across the region, what's already working, because we don't want to start from scratch with our ideas. We really want to be able to build on what we're already doing well across the Denver region. We also asked them to do some of the early analysis around the transportation housing connection. So we'll have that as a piece of that foundation when we engage stakeholders. And then the second phase is really about that strategy development. So we'll start by establishing clear goals and objectives, and then look at the best practice research we're asking the consultants to bring to then formulate our strategy development. And the third phase, this is one of the phases that I would say it's not really going to happen after the first two. It'll happen throughout. And that is something that we heard strongly from our board when we started this work. And that is, how do we actually create a strong structure for implementation of the strategies we're going to develop? In addition, one of the things that we heard during the assessment as in terms of a barrier was this concept of community will and understanding, or not just understanding, but how do we support our local communities and having discussions around housing and coming up with solutions that work in their community. And so we have asked our consultants to help us with that, to develop communication collateral and also strategies for really mobilizing around some of these strategies. All right, so engagement. This is one key piece we wanted to bring to all of you. In the development of our regional housing needs assessment, we had a really engaged advisory group. It was about 25 professionals who represented all sorts of sectors that brought their experience around housing to the table. And we engaged them throughout the process, even checking in with them about, is our process the right process, and then checking in with us throughout the process to really ground truth what we are hearing from our consultants. And we plan to engage an advisory group again. We're hoping many of those folks that served during the needs assessment will continue with us through the strategy. We anticipate that group to meet about 4 or 5 times throughout the year to help us really zero in on that subject matter expertise that we will need in the development of the strategy. We also plan to do focus groups and stakeholder interviews. Those worked very well during our assessment development. And then we're working with our consultants to develop opportunities for community engagement that can reach a lot of different communities throughout the process. So the one, I want to go back up to the top, the steering committee. This is what we're adding for the regional housing strategy. One of the things we are really intentional about is that throughout this process, we want to engage key leaders, especially our board, on understanding how these strategies can be best incorporated into the work we do at DRCOG. And so we are going to form a steering committee to really look at that strategic guidance throughout the process and anticipate this group meeting 2 to 3 times throughout the process. And so we are interested in finding at least 4 to 6 board members who would be willing to serve on this steering committee. And so happy to to chat about that afterwards if you have questions about what that looks like. I know you all are very busy and probably serve on many different boards, so I don't want to steer you wrong in terms of what the commitment is and what the focus is. And so I think at this point, Doug, do you want to pause and add anything about the steering committee?
Mr. Rex?
Thank you, sir, very much. I really don't, Sheila, other than the fact that it's, you know, we'd really like to have, what we're planning on, so that committee itself will be a small group, right? And, no, I mean, Sheila, I don't know if there's anything specifically you wanted me to talk about.
No, that's great. I just didn't want to, I wanted to give you that opportunity. If
Okay.
needed.
Sheila or Doug, what's your
Yeah.
timetable on finding those people to serve in that role?
Great question. So we're hoping to kick off the first meeting in April. So it's pretty quick turnaround for that first meeting. And then we anticipate probably a second meeting sometime midsummer, and then a third meeting, I would say October to November timeframe.
Would interested directors reach out to you, to Doug, to Melinda?
Yeah, I think either Doug or I,
Okay.
whatever works best for you.
Great.
Great. All right. So we've gotten to the point of our presentation where we actually want to have a discussion. And so on the screen, you should see a link to menti.com. I'm going to put it in the chat as well. You can either go, if you're at a computer, go to menti.com to the link in the chat and then put in the code that's on the screen. And I can also read that out. We also have the QR code there, so if that's easier to hop on using another device, that works too. So I'll give everybody a minute to either get into the Menti website or get the QR code to work. And then if you're in there, the code is 92593966. And while you're doing that, I just want to give a shout out to one of our wonderful new planners. Logan Semino is on the call, and he is helping to facilitate this exercise. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and then Logan's going to share his screen with the Mentimeter website. Hi, Logan. Feel free to share. Are you able to share your screen? There we go. All right. So everybody's already jumped into the first question. So the first question is, in 1 or 2 words, what is your main goal for the regional housing strategy? And I'll just kind of highlight what we see on the screen. So collaboration, equity, homes, workforce, visionary, significant, options. I see opportunity, collaboration, affordability coming up a lot. So this is great. Well, that was our good prep and kind of a warm up for the next question. So thank you. We'll go on to the next question.
Shoot, 1 second, Sheila. I'm trying to figure out how to do this on Zoom.
Okay.
Sheila, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh my goodness. Oh, thank goodness. Thank you, Melinda.
Yeah.
Sheila and Logan, will we be able to have a screen capture of this to send out to the directors?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, Logan advanced to the next question. So what do you see as the biggest challenge to developing and implementing a successful regional housing strategy? Select up to 2 choices. So just to give you a prep, so we did create some choices for you to choose from. We're asking you to choose 2 because we want to get a sense of which ones rise to the top. We will have another question after this where you'll get to write in other challenges that you think are missing from this list. Great. So the one that seems to be rising to the top is balancing flexibility for local governments with the need for regional coordination. It's not an uncommon challenge to us at DRCOG. So a really important one to be considering and mindful of throughout the process. Looks like the second highest seems to be identifying funding and resources for regional collaboration. And that's certainly one of the challenges we even heard people voice during the regional housing needs assessment. And it looks like the next 2 that seem to be kind of neck and neck is aligning diverse regional priorities into a shared strategy. It's challenging because while housing affordability is something that all our communities have expressed that they're challenged by, what's happening in different parts of the region does look slightly different. And so the solutions will look slightly different. So aligning those diverse priorities is going to be a challenge. And then the next one seems to be strong participation and buy-in from local governments. And then the one that seems maybe less challenging than the rest is clearly defining DRCOG's role in supporting local and regional coordination. Great. Why don't we go on to the next question? All right. So this is where feel free to add your thoughts about other challenges. So what other challenges are there to developing and implementing a successful regional housing strategy? And you can submit multiple responses. So we'll give this a minute. And then as people are entering those, because we'd love to capture them. So if you can enter them, great. Logan and I are also taking notes. We would love to invite anybody to come off mute and share and elaborate on challenges that you think are important to be considering. Seeing a lot of really great things we should be considering. So different goals among jurisdictions, community buy-in, money, current resident buy-in. That seems to relate to other comments of NIMBYs and YIMBYs. Balancing carrots and sticks, I think that's going to be a really important one. Money is on there more than once. Lack of public partnerships. Natural disasters that are becoming more frequent and destructive. Water supply. Available land. Cost collaborations among local governments, construction defect issues. Keeping local control. Lack of federal resources. This is great. You don't have to, but if anybody wants to come off mute and elaborate on anything, you're welcome to do that.
Madam Chair. I think you're back to chairing now.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't want to interrupt anyone.
No, you're
Jeslyn, you have a question for Sheila or Logan?
Not
Or
really a
comment?
question, just like what my comment was just, we've made a substantial investment in a housing strategy. And we've started, excuse me, to implement some like really meaningful work through our Housing Policy Commission. And just, my thought, I just pause and think like, if this is misaligned, which I don't imagine it would be too far off, but we're pretty far down that work, and I know it's different for every municipality, but just speaking for my own.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that's such an important point, because the regional housing strategy, I think our goal is both alignment and also to be focusing in on the regionally scaled solutions. And one of the things that I will make sure we tell our consultants is to take a look at those existing regional housing strategy. That's on their list of things to do, but I'll call that out. And so if there's others that feel like there's an existing document within their jurisdiction, please reach out, that we make sure that we capture that during this discovery period.
Thank you. Director Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the challenges is that our state legislators and officials think they can solve the problem, and they really get ahead of us in terms of putting the cart in front of the horse. So I often wonder, how do we get the state to align with the assessment and making sure that they are agreeing this is the right data, such that we're all on the same page.
Thank you, Director Kondo and Madam Chair. I can give a bit of a response. So on one level, our regional housing needs assessment, I don't think we've formally shared this with the board, but we do plan on doing a informational briefing at your next board meeting. We did hear from DOLA that our regional housing needs assessment, it has conditional approval for acceptance. So we turned it in by the deadline that they allowed existing needs assessments to be turned in by December 31st, 2024. We turned it into DOLA and asked them to review it. They've given us a response that conditionally it is approved. There is one big step we have to do, and that is a public review. So we'll be coming to you at your board meeting in March to give an overview of that process. And then just a little refresher. So one of the new state laws around assessments did not require regional assessments, but if there is a regional assessment, local governments can lean on a regional assessment. So our intention of going through this process is so that our member governments can refer to or use the regional housing needs assessment as the assessment to comply with Senate Bill 24-174. So just wanted to give a little update preview to what you'll hear in March on that. And then as far as the strategy goes, one good thing is that the state is helping to fund this. We have a grant through DOLA for our regional strategy. And at least the conversations we're having with the Department of Local Affairs staff is that they're very appreciative of DRCOG taking the step to do a regional strategy for a number of different reasons. And one is that they recognize that not all local governments are the same and have the same capacity to do their own assessments or do their own action plans. And so working together in that collaboration at the regional level is very helpful to so many. So at least at the staff level, we're hearing really good things about the direction we're going.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then my only other concern, and I think we've seen this on some of the responses, is water and that availability to support the growth and additional housing units. So again, that's more of a deep thought. I'm not expecting an answer, but that is something that is on the front of my mind.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Sheila. Are there any other directors that have comments or questions for Sheila or Logan?
And Madam Chair, we do have 2 more questions. Is that right, Logan? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we move on to the
You
next?
bet.
All right. Okay, so this is same as the last 2 questions. We have a question in front of us with some prepared responses. We'd love for you to pick 2 to get a sense of which ones seem the most important, I guess. They're all important, but gives us some priority, sense of priority. And then we'll have a second question where you can fill in your own. So the question is, what are the most important outcomes for the regional housing strategy process? So on this slide, if you can pick 2 choices. All right, so there are 2 that seem to be coming to the top. One, a clear, actionable framework that supports local governments in advancing housing solutions. The second one that's coming in is identification of funding and policy tools that can support implementation. And then a strategy that is adaptable and responsive to future housing challenges. And the one that seems to be 4th place, I guess, is strong regional coordination and partnerships that enhance local efforts. And then the one that got a few votes, but maybe not as many, is a process that builds consensus and broad stakeholder buy-in. Great. We'll go on to the next question. And this is where it's the same question we just asked, but you can type in your own responses. So what are other important outcomes that are important for the regional housing strategy process? Mitigation against displacement. And with this question as well, Madam Chair, we were thinking if people want to come off mute and share any of their thoughts, they're welcome to. So sufficient inventory of workforce affordable housing to meet 80% of the demand. Combining resources between jurisdictions, getting houses built and occupied by full-time residents, preserving existing affordable housing, measurable success, alignment of housing growth with transportation infrastructure and investments. Regional coordination is important, but needs to be accepted for a solution at state level. Clear data and supporting evidence for the proposed strategies. The public is able to gain housing in the 80% AMI or less. Key metrics, buy-in from local governments. A process that reflects the outcomes we are trying to achieve. If we want a regional strategy, we need a process that reflects regional buy-in, partnership, and commitment to the process and outcomes. Meeting housing needs and pathways for homeownership. A useful playbook that is relevant years from now. ability for different and distinct communities to grow and develop based on their local plans while contributing to the regional plan. Aging and disabled housing. Great. It looks like maybe the entries are slowing. Well, this was our last question. Thank you so much for engaging with us. We'll take all this information back and again, build this as the foundation as we're launching with our stakeholder engagement. Logan, I might share my screen just for the last slide. Thank you. All right. Oh, it's the end. Sorry, I thought I had one more, but I will put in the chat the web page where you can find our regional housing needs assessment, our data dashboard, and even updates on our process to get our regional housing needs assessment through this compliance process with the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Excuse me. Thank you, Logan. Are there any questions before we move on? Thank you for your participation, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to now participate. So thank you very much. We'll move on to our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, 2025 Mitigation Action Plan Report by our very own Jacob Rieger. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Whitlow. Great to see you all. Give me just a second to share my presentation. Okay, and then... Okay, can someone confirm that you're seeing that in presentation mode?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so this item concerns our annual report that we need to do related to our mitigation action plan, which is part of our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. For some of you, this will feel like a review. You've heard this before. For some of you, this may be brand new, so I do want to give just a little bit of context. I will start with kind of this layer cake framework slide, but as a reminder, this is a state requirement, actually not a federal requirement. In 2022, the State Transportation Commission adopted the Transportation Greenhouse Gas Planning Standard. It applies to all of the 5 metropolitan planning organizations in the state, including DRCOG, in their MPO areas and in our MPO area, as well as CDOT for the non-MPO, primarily rural areas of the state. We are to comply with the Greenhouse Gas Planning Standard through, in our case, our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. This is, some of you have seen this before, our layer cake of kind of our compliance strategy. We did a lot of things in updating our regional transportation plan back in 2022 to demonstrate compliance. I'm not going to go through all of these today, but just the point here is that we did need to do a lot of things, and we knew we would, right? This isn't like, you know, doing 1 or 2 strategies or changing a couple of projects in the plan and calling it a day. We knew it wouldn't be that easy. It's not meant to be that easy. We actually had a very comprehensive integrated framework of strategies here to comply with the rule. But the thing I'm going to focus on is that last one in the lower right, the mitigation measures. Just before we get there, though, this is a table with a lot of numbers. We don't want to do math late on a Wednesday afternoon, but basically this is just sort of stepping us through where we started with our, at the time, adopted regional transportation plan, our original plan, which formed the baseline for this work, and then some of those strategies that you saw as we kind of started implementing them or planning for them and modeling them, kind of showing the increment of change in terms of meeting our reduction levels. This is a chart that shows greenhouse gas reduction levels by analysis year. This is required by the rule. So we're looking at 25, 2030, 2040, and 2050. These are in million metric tons. So stepping through the various strategies, and then at the bottom, we compare that with the levels that are actually, and these are numerical levels that are actually specified in the rule. These are targets that we need to, reduction levels that we need to achieve by analysis year. So basically this table demonstrates that when we do all the work, including a mitigation action plan as the last piece to help us get there, we did comply or we did meet with each of the reduction levels by analysis year. So I want to focus on the mitigation action plan in particular, because as the first bullet says, it's really needed as a last step to close the remaining reduction level gap. And the idea is that if you do all these other things, and we did all of the other things, we made project changes in our plan, we made enhancements to our regional traffic model, we revisited our land use assumptions, we did some financial plan work in the model in terms of programmatic strategies in the plan. We did lots of things, but we still weren't quite there. So we needed a mitigation action plan to close that remaining gap. So that means we now have a mitigation action plan and we report on it annually. The mitigation action plan documents our region approach to using mitigation measures, and those mitigation measures, and I'll show them to you in a second, are actually defined as part of the greenhouse gas rule. They are defined by CDOT through a document called Policy Directive 1610, which is just sort of their nomenclature, but it's basically a listing of all the approved and available mitigation measures that can be used and how you measure those mitigation measures if you're going to use them in a mitigation action plan. Regardless, we report and analyze mitigation measures at the regional level. So again, this is all regional focused analysis. It's our regional transportation plan. It applies to our entire MPO area. So this is not project specific. It's not location or jurisdiction specific. It's regional in nature in terms of the scale of this work. However, having said that, we have always anticipated that implementation of a particular mitigation measure probably anticipated in a small fraction of our region. In strategic and applicable geographies. I mean, as you'll see in a moment when you see the measures, they make sense in certain places, right? And they don't make sense in other places. And we knew that, and we're strategic about that coming into defining these measures in the mitigation action plan. We do have ample opportunity to implement successfully over time to help achieve our compliance, which actually starts in 2030. We did not need mitigation measures to achieve our 2025 compliance. We don't need them until 2030. So until 2030, we have a chance to kind of look at these measures, assess them, maybe change them over time to help us get there. So in terms of the mitigation measures themselves, they are policy-based, not project-based. And I do want to clarify here that in CDOT's Policy Directive 1610, they do identify project-based mitigation measures. It turns out for us, though, given our tools and our planning process and the way that we think about our regional transportation plan, we already accounted for those types of mitigation measures either directly in our plan or through our modeling or through our analysis or through the other things that we did to help achieve compliance. So for us, we were actually looking at kind of once we did all that work, what kind of remained on the table, what was still available to us in terms of using mitigation measures. Regardless, these measures, as I've said, they're measured regionally but implemented locally. The measures are voluntary, and we talked a lot about this for those of you that were here at the time, and I want to emphasize that point. Mitigation measures for you as local government representatives are voluntary. You're not required to do them. You're not required to implement them in any specific location or time frame. It's completely voluntary for you. But if you do implement them, we want to help you. And if you want to implement them, we want to know about it because we report on them in our annual report. As I said, we can adjust those mitigation measures over time based on implementation status, but we do need to report annually on our sort of regional progress in implementing those measures, achieving the mitigation action plan. This is required under the rule. If you have a mitigation action plan, you have to report on it annually. We are working on that report now. I'm going to touch on it in the following slides. We are required to transmit our report to the Transportation Commission by April 1st of each year. We also have a tradition, and we will do this again. This will be our third annual report. And each year, once we complete our annual mitigation action plan report, as we provide it to the Transportation Commission, we will also provide a copy to you all. So I'm just going to briefly walk you through the actual mitigation measures. I'll just animate this slide through. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these individually, but they all kind of share the commonality. These are policy-based measures because, again, the project-based measures we've already accounted for in our planning process and in our modeling and the other things that we've done. So these measures relate to things that you all do, again, at the local level, increasing residential and job density, transit-oriented development, minimum parking requirements, complete streets, these are, recognized as local government actions. We picked these measures both because they were what were available to us to prepare a mitigation action plan, but because we also wanted to be intentional about structuring a mitigation action plan that was familiar and builds on the work that we're already doing in this region, right? We're already doing these things. They're mostly not new. We have a legacy of doing this work in this region already, and we wanted to build on that. The other thing I'll point out here is that the table I showed you earlier was million metric tons. This is the one time I will show you numbers in actual metric tons. And, it's important. These are small amounts, and I will acknowledge that, but they are important. And again, needed to close that kind of last gap to achieve compliance. So even though these are small individually, they kind of still add up to really help us in our regional analysis. And that was the idea of the mitigation action plan. So here I will point out and apologize that your slide deck says 2023. It was true in 2023. It's still true in 2025. These are sort of timeless, but these are the requirements under the greenhouse gas planning standard for a mitigation action plan annual report. These are the things that are actually required of us each year. So essentially, it's sort of a deep dive into each of these mitigation measures, the timelines for implementation, their current status, if we're in progress or we've completed one, kind of talking about the benefit of that. If, and we're not here yet, but if we got to a point where we're delaying or canceling or substituting a measure, kind of talking about that, and how we achieve that. And then under the state statute of disproportionately impacted communities, if we have measures kind of in those areas and we change those measures, we need to talk about that as well. Because our measures are not location specific, that does not directly apply to us. However, we do address disproportionately impacted communities within our mitigation action plan, and we do touch on it in our annual reporting on the mitigation measures. So in terms of actually getting to the annual report, some key issues that we've been looking at both in past years and kind of this year in particular as we're preparing the 2025 report, continue to sort of wrestle with how do we track mitigation measures, right? The way they're defined in Policy Directive 1610 is actually pretty specific. These land use measures are all about rezonings. It's the amount of acreage rezoned. It's not what's built. It's not what's implemented. It's not how it's designed. It's not how it's achieved. It's not how has impacts on the transportation system over time. It's actually about the amount of acreage of land rezoned. And it is what it is, right? But that's actually turns out to be a pretty difficult thing to track across the region. We've been kind of working on that over the past couple of years. We would actually, frankly, prefer to get to a place where we're tracking development directly that actually is easier for us to track. And so we've been having a conversation with CDOT about the potential of refining or making changes to Policy Directive 1610 to reflect the reality on the ground in terms of how we can track some of these land use oriented measures. And I will say, without speaking for CDOT, they also have a mitigation action plan. Theirs has some commonalities with us and some differences, but they also have land use measures in their mitigation action plan. They are also wrestling with this issue, particularly when you think about they have to track across the state, right? So this is something that we're trying to work through together. Obviously, after last year's legislative session, and we've talked about some of this already in the housing agenda item, and you all talked about this a lot in terms of things like the parking bill 1304, transit-oriented communities bill, the housing work that Sheila touched on. We recognize that the state legislation that was passed last year will touch on this work over time. It doesn't eliminate the need for a mitigation action plan, but it may very well kind of change the framework and the work that we do together in terms of tracking some of these mitigation measures. So we're starting to kind of bring those considerations into this year's report. We also have a task in our Metropolitan Planning Organization Unified Planning Work Program, which is our kind of staff work plan of the work that we do for you in this region as your MPO. We have a task in our Unified Planning Work Program about providing support to you all as local governments. Again, if you're interested in doing these mitigation measures, we want to help you. We want to provide support to you. And so we have been working to kind of define the specific activities that we think would be helpful to you, that we could undertake in partnership with you to support kind of the implementation of these measures over time. And then finally, as you likely know, we are in the midst of starting to update a major update, federally required 4-year update of our 2050 regional transportation plan that we will adopt in fall of next year. As part of our major regional transportation plan update, we're starting to ask some questions of ourselves and our partners at CDOT and the other partners. How do we re-baseline that table that I showed you? Because it was based on our plan as originally adopted. So when we update our regional transportation plan, how do we re-baseline that table? How does that change our analysis in terms of where we're at and what will be required to meet those targets by analysis here over time? And how will that affect our mitigation action plan, right? New plan, new modeling, new rebaselining, potentially kind of a new framework for this. Will we still need a mitigation action plan? We might. If we do, what will it look like? So while that doesn't impact this year's report, it is something we're keeping our eye on because over time, as we get towards 2030 and the other analysis years, it may change or influence how we structure our mitigation action plan and how we achieve specific mitigation measures to fulfill the requirements. So that was a little bit of a drink from a fire hydrant, but wanted to kind of give you that overview. Again, we will provide you the annual report once we complete it and submit it to the Transportation Commission. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Director Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jacob, could you provide more specifics on the rezonings issue? We do a lot of rezoning and map amendments that don't necessarily produce housing because we have a form-based code. It could be mixed use that contains housing. It could be entirely housing, or it could be entirely commercial. How do we account for that? And I understand that it doesn't mean that something actually gets built. It's just the zoning capacity. But I can tell you that rezoning is going to result in, 100 units, 50 units, or 0 units.
Yep. No, thank you for the question. It's a good question. So what I'm not showing here on this slide, but what is included in our mitigation action plan is specific thresholds and measures for each of these requirements.
Right.
I'll admit I don't have them memorized off the top of my head for increasing residential and job density, but those are defined in the mitigation action plan. And so I think our challenge, Director Flynn and everyone, is that, when you do a rezoning, for example, in the city of Denver, do we know about it? How can we capture that? Even if we do know about it and can capture it, does it count, so to speak, in air quotes, does it count towards the mitigation action plan? How do we sort of total that up over time? If you do, say, 10 rezonings a year to make up a number, City of Westminster does 2 rezonings a year, right? Like, how do you start tallying that? You sort of get into this land use sort of accounting, sort of bean counting. I mean, it sounds a little sort of whiny, but the truth is that that's kind of what we're struggling with, is how do we know what's relevant and how do we track that and sort that and demonstrate, are we really making progress there? So I don't want to say that those things aren't important and we don't want to know about them. I think what we're thinking through is how do we get our arms around that to help you to learn about it, to know about it, to do something with it. And is there an easier way to do this piece of the work?
Certainly. Thank you. I'm just as confused now as when I asked the question. I recognize how tough it is, especially with the code we have. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Flynn. Are there any other directors that have questions or comments for Jacob tonight? Doug. It's on you. We can't hear you.
So sorry. 3 years. You think I'd figure it out? No, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jacob, for the update on this. And I think there is, we have some concerns, and I think this is part of the growing pains with a rule like this, right? It's like we can't, and Jacob kind of alluded to some of the tracking concerns that we have. And Jacob, my question is probably more related to to re-baselining and what might have to be possible as far as that. And just to provide a little bit more detail to the board related to that, is that the targets that were established, correct me if I'm wrong, was an actual number, right? And it wasn't proportional to our growth as a region. So it was based on a snapshot in time. And the problem is if you as you go out into the future, the expected growth that we had in our last plan is not the same as what we're expecting in this update we're working on now. Can you just explain how that might affect the targets?
Yeah, it's a good question, Executive Director Rex. So the honest answer is I don't know the answer, right? So let's just start with that. Don't know the answer. What I will say here, and again, there's a lot of numbers on this table. The rule as currently structured, and this is where it gets really confusing. So Director Flynn, if you're already confused, I'm sorry, you're about to be more confused. The way the rule is structured is that the baseline is our regional transportation plan as we originally adopted it in April of 2021 and as modeled at the time of adoption, right? So we already had a lot of good stuff in the plan. We had bus rapid transit, we had other multimodal investments, we had a really good plan. That became the baseline for which then we sort of measure our progress. And then we updated the plan in 2022 to comply with the rule, right? And as Doug pointed out, the requirements here in sort of the second row from the bottom, the reduction level requirement from the greenhouse gas rule, these are actual numbers. These are not percentages. And so to his point, that is a question that we are starting to ask ourselves and our partners as we get into a major plan update. How do we rebaseline, and do these numerical sort of thresholds change in accordance with a new plan, with our growth or not as strong growth trends or other trends, electric vehicle adoption over time, post-COVID trends. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this, right? So the short answer is I don't know the answer to that question, but those are issues and those are questions that we are starting to talk to CDOT and other partners about, because we need to figure out, frankly, fairly soon, the implications for rebaselining and how we're going to measure this going forward. So Doug, that was a little bit of a non-answer, but I hope that got a little bit of what you were looking for.
No, that's great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jacob, very much for your time tonight. And thank you, Sheila and Logan, for being here with us tonight. Is there anything else that staff, Doug, or anyone that would like to bring up before we adjourn tonight?
Well, Madam Chair, if I may, I might just, seeing you provided the opportunity, I might just mention that you should have received, all board members and alternates should have received an invite from us for our annual retreat on April 11th and 12th. The 11th will be in the evening. We're zoning in on a couple locations. Melinda and I are gonna visit a couple here real soon, so we should have that information available for a decision by the Performance and Engagement Committee in a couple weeks. But we're looking forward to it. We're finishing up the proposed agenda for Performance and Engagement Committee too. So please put that on your calendar. I think it was a great time over the last couple of years, and we look forward to seeing all you there. So I just wanted to make sure that was on your calendar. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, again, thank you for joining us tonight. Apologize for the volume mishap tonight, but enjoy your evening. We will see everyone on the 19th of March, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.